Hi, everyone. Yes, hello, welcome. New Prefect stream today. If this is your first time, welcome. My name is Laura, and today we're going to be doing a stream about Orion and Subflows. So I actually threw in a little bit of Prefect 1.0 in here so we could talk more sort of historically, I guess, about subflows, talk a little bit about what it's like in Prefect, a little bit about what it's like in Orion. So hopefully there's some good stuff for everybody in here too. Maybe a little bit of housekeeping. I have some notes over here I'm just going to peep at. But I wanted to mention just some upcoming events, and I also just wanted to mention a little bit before we sort of reestablish about Orion, about how great the feedback has been. So let me start with that first. Everybody who's been trying out Orion, which is kind of like a new second generation version of Prefect, but is in technical preview, right? Thank you, right? So the feedback is super great. A ton of people have been giving, their ideas. Some people have been kicking it around. There's actually been a lot of good insight about performance improvement. So that's exactly totally the type of thing that is just awesome to get during a technical preview. So keep it up. If you haven't kicked it around a little bit, hopefully today's stream will give you some inspiration to do so. And then if you do have anything you want to reach out to the team about, you can open a GitHub issue. You can hit people up on Slack. Everybody's listening to what you think about Orion and how we can make it work for everybody. So definitely don't be shy about that. I mentioned I want to talk about a few upcoming events. So there is a fireside chat planned with our hypest Prefect folk, Jeremiah and Chris. I'm sorry, Jeremiah. So you should definitely come to that. That's going to be, let me check my notes again, the 17th. I think that's next week. Pen your schedule in for that. I think you can find a meetup link about that soon. That's going to be about the future, what's happening next year, right? The year is supposed to be ending, they say, right now, and then we're going to do 2022, right? And do something new in 2022. So look forward to that. And then the other thing that I want to sort of hype up a little bit here, I'm going to switch to my screen so everybody can kind of see what I'm talking about here, is this weekly streaming series on Twitch. So right now we're hanging on YouTube, right? But there's another streaming series happening on Twitch now for Prefect, where Prefect engineers kind of hang out once a week. It's on Wednesdays generally in the afternoon Eastern time. You can see there's one scheduled. I'm in Pacific time, right? So this is going to be 10:30 Pacific time, but usually somewhere between 1 and 3 p.m. Eastern time. And you can just hang out. I mean, they're not streaming right now. I'm streaming right now. But you can hang out here and you can ask questions in the Twitch chat. Usually they'll kind of go through making a little flow and explain what they're doing as they're going along. And it's just another platform for you to see what's going on with Prefect. You can ask them more live questions and everything else. And I see in the chat someone mentioning that the loading screen for this stream today is basically from the Twitch assets, right? So we're combining our beautiful new overlays here and everything. So pretty great. So I think that is all of the housekeeping. So let's, make sure you subscribe to everything, right? And then just reestablish a little bit where we are here with Prefect Orion, right? So folks who are coming to this stream because they use Prefect, you may have already heard, but Orion is kind of the new second generation version. I actually brought it up in the last stream, and we did kind of a little walkthrough of kind of the first drops of what was in Orion. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. In that stream, I failed to pull up this blog, so I'm bringing it up now just so everybody knows. There's also written by Jeremiah some intro about Orion, and you can see, this was published in October, right? So the technical preview started in October. Here we are in December. There's some changes, some updates, things. Feedback is being implemented, and then what I really want to highlight today is about subflows, right? So Orion is generally, compared to Prefect, easier to host. The API is a little easier to understand. It's kind of easier to attach Orion to your legacy code or to your pre-production code. Those are some of the qualities of it that kind of learn from what Prefect 1.0, for lack of a better term, has or taught us, I guess. And yeah, what I want to sort of highlight today is definitely the Subflow part of it and changes that have happened since the last stream. So let's actually talk about subflows generally, especially in terms of like their history and a little bit even about how they work in Prefect 1.0, right? Because I think that helps explain. So let me pull up, find my tiny little windows down there, right? We can get rid of you for now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about subflows in just Prefect 1.0 and some history. So I'm actually going to pull up this. This is the Prefect 1.0 docs. And basically in Prefect 1.0, there is a way to run subflows. And by that, I mean call a flow from another flow, more or less. That a flow is a unit of work that is like subsidiary to another flow. You might have like a larger parent flow that calls children flows, many of them, just one of them, you know, for whatever reason that you have. So ultimately, this is kind of difficult to implement in Prefect 1.0, kind of just because the flow is, as a concept, was already kind of like this sort of top level unit, not particularly composable with other of its kind, just from like a API and implementation perspective. Everything is kind of encapsulated in the flow. I'm sure people who already have experience with Prefect, you know, you need your flow context, you throw all your tasks in there. That's like the great, awesome magic of Prefects. In the first place. But once people sort of wanted to like break that boundary of like, oh, actually I want my flow to like call another flow, or I wanted to pass this data on to this other flow instead of pass it task to task, that wasn't something that was really like top of mind, I guess, in the design for Prefect in the first place, and it just made it a little bit harder. That being said, you totally can, right? So there is some tooling, which I'm going to show you in a second here. These Prefect tasks, there's these ones called Start Flow Run, and then lower in the doc, and in a second example, I'm going to show you there's some task functions, task functions basically that do a similar thing. But again, Orion learned from Prefect, right? It's the second generation that's learning from everything that happened in Prefect. So Subflows was like top line design goal. So when we do get to the Orion part of the demo here, and part of the reason why I'm showing you how to do this in Prefect 1.0 and in Orion is just kind of see how like the semantics are totally different. It just feels a lot more natural in Orion, and that's because that was, you know, top of the line concept in that case. So we can talk a little bit more about subflows in general later, because I do have a couple other points that I want to make. But let me show you what this looks like in Prefect 1.0. So I have a terminal over here, this like whatever homebrew kind skin, right? That is running Prefect server start over here. So and to click over here, this is my Prefect server running locally for me. And I also have a Prefect agent running. I have a local agent running. And I'm going to register some flows and run them. And these flows are using either that start flow task or the function, which I'm going to actually talk to you in detail about by pulling up Sublime Text. Okay, so here's kind of like the top parent view if you were using this start flow run task. So again, slide back here to the docs, right? I'm talking about this start flow run task here in Prefect 1.0. And if you sort of were starting from the parent flow purview while you were looking at this, you would have some sort of flow, conveniently I named it parent flow, that uses the start flow run task to instantiate these task classes, and then, you know, adds them to the flow here. And then we're just going to register it, right? So start flow run takes, there's actually a couple different parameters that I can take, but I'm just going to highlight here that I have the name of my other flow, the project that flow is registered in, and then I have this other keyword here called wait. Honestly, this second one is kind of unnecessary, but this called wait, which makes the execution of this flow blocking to future steps of the parent flow, right? So this is kind of a way to parameterize around kind of the initial implementation of start flow run, which was like start this flow run and then like do whatever other stuff that I want to do, right? Like just it can keep going like in the background, and you know that's useful if it's not blocking for that flow run to complete. This is kind of a way to basically add that upstream dependency feeling between flows that are initiated with start flow run. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at A and B. So I have them open over here. apparently I made a change, so I guess I'll press Control S there. So these are super basic. Oh, I see. I messed up my indentation. Let's not save that. So here's flow A. These are all very simple so that we can just see what is going on this whole time. But my flow A just does this return data task. My return data task just like says, you know, that we're returning data and returns a value 1. Thrilling, I know. But this is just going to return data. And then my flow B is kind of set up stylistically to receive data. So it can take some parameter and can call this receive data task. You know, the ideal situation here in my like mega subflow plan is that flow A is going to return this value 1. Flow B is going to use that as its input parameter to this data argument here for, you know, my 1 receive contrived here, but toy receive data task function, and then it's going to print that out, right? Like in my dream, these flows like hand data off between each other. Then everything else is just kind of like prefect server setup, right? So I'm setting my run config to local run so that it matches with my local agent and operates that way, and then register it. So I'm actually going to register all of these flows and then run them so we can kind of see what the UI experience is. Maybe already you can kind of see sort of what the API experience is like, right? But we're going to see how that translates into Prefect 1.0 UI experience so we can contrast it with Orion later. So let me come over here and I'm going to register all of these just mainline in this script. So let's go ahead and get flow A and flow B going here, right? And by going, I mean I'm registering them, right? So the final flow run task. Yeah, sorry. I have to read and talk at the same time. The final line in all of these Python scripts that I'm running define these flows that I just explained to you and then registers them. So that means that, over here in Chrome, in Prefect Server, let me give it a little refresh here, we can see that my flows are registered, right? So this means that Prefect Server API knows their shape, what they are, that maybe one day I would like to run them, and indeed, I do want to run them right now. So let's actually give, I guess, just parent flow a kickoff, right? Let's come up here, I'm clicking into parent flow, and I'm going to give this a quick run. And then I'm going to just peep over here. We're going to expect my agent to pick it up, right? So it's like, I found you want me to run this, and I will totally do that. So if we drop ourselves into this run, let's go check the little modal window of the run that was created just now. Hopefully, let me pull this up a little bit, just make sure everybody can see that. You'll see that these tasks basically are to run these flows, flow A and flow B. So it just finished succeeding, so that's cool. So let's go check at the flow A task run for this flow run. And you'll see here that, you know, this doesn't necessarily, especially in the logs, it's quite clear, this doesn't necessarily surface any of the actual work that happened in flow A. It's just like, hey, I went and like did this somewhere else, right? So I think this is a big highlight about what you're going to see as different in Orion, and what you're going to see is sort of symptomatic of how Prefect 1.0 kind of thinks as flow as kind of like this like solid top level thing. For this flow run task to work, it's going to sort of kick off this flow fundamentally elsewhere, right? Like my agent picked up other flow runs because they were submitted on my behalf by the start run task. You can see that 3 of them ran here. And then if we go over to there, right? Like, so I like navigated to the logs. Now I can see the flow for A that's associated with this parent flow. But again, that like UI flow is not necessarily like super easy, right? So here is where like if I actually wanted to see the data from, or the output logs from flow A is actually a property of the flow A, you know, instance itself, not its parent flow. And then let's go back one more here. Oops, too far. Let's get back into my runs. Yes. My enigmatic Jacquemart. Flow B, kind of similar situation. If we're going to take a look at the logs here, then we're going to see that it's telling us that this flow run was happening over here. right? And then of course, you know, we could like go click over here and paste this URL in here. It definitely works, but just is not super seamless. So in this case, I'm not passing any data in between flow A and flow B. If we go back and look at my setup here, you can see like they straight up don't look like they are anyways. And just a little background too on flow B, I have it set up that if it didn't, my parameter is set up to have just a string, no data received, so we can like we can see that easily if that is the case. So if you do want to pass data between subflows, that was previously pretty difficult, not first class, didn't have like an API way to do that. But if I slide back to this blog post announcement for prefect 0.15.0, so this was in June, you'll see there's a whole section in here about making it easier to retrieve data from between subflows. So again, we're in Prefect 1.0, but I just want to point out that this system exists, right, in Prefect 1.0. But the difference here from an API perspective is that you need to use this other form, I guess you could say, of the start run tasks and kind of chain them together in a specific way. So you'll see here, it's kind of long, but there's just more, you know, parameters over here. That we're going to use instead this function here, create flow run. We're going to use this other function called wait for flow run, this other one called get task run result. That's the part where we're going to like nab the result out of the API for the child flow run so that we can pass it into the next one. If you look here on line 10, create flow run, if I scroll over, you'll see it takes a argument called parameters, which you can pass in. Again, you know, my top of flow B has a parameter waiting to receive interesting data. And in this case, that's the result of line 8 here, which is this chained call of calling this other flow run, waiting it for it to be done, and then grabbing the task run result from it. So this totally exists and like totally works. What time is it? Just want to make sure I have time to show it. Let's just register that really quick. Flow run function. But I want to highlight just a couple points about it, which is also in the API docs and the blog post. So in the API docs, if you want to read about these three, you know, functions that work together, that you kind of need to chain together so that you can grab that data and pass it on to the next thing along the way. On the prefect docs and the prefect tasks API documentation, scroll on down because it's on the same page, right? So here we go, create flow run. This is the function that I'm using to create my flow run of flow A. If we keep going down, well, probably a little bit further, they're in alphabetical order, right? Wait for flow run, right? This was kind of my second step. I needed to wait for my flow run to be done. So instead of passing that wait keyword like we saw with the start run task, we instead call this second function. Cool. And then the last step here is get task run result. And the interesting thing here is that it needs to know what task am I getting the result from, right? So there's not necessarily one specific way to say this whole flow returns, you know, this one thing. Tasks return things, right? So you need to include the information of what task are we talking about. So this is based on the task slug, and just as a point of observation, it's mentioned in the blog post too, but the task slug is a combination, the task slug here is a combination of either the name of the function, a slug that you set yourself on the task, but also the order that it was added to the flow. So that's why this -1 is at the end here. This is the name of my function. I didn't give it any extra special slug or anything, so it just pulls the name of the function. And then this -1 because it was the first thing added to the flow. So like a little bit of like little pieces in there, right, that you just need to keep track of to make sure that you're targeting the right task to get your data result. But then that all runs as expected. So let's go just experience this really quick with my new flow. Parent flow data dependencies was what I called this in my script for the functional version of this that passes the data between the two. I'm going to give that a run and wait for my little modal window to tell me that Berserk Horse is now executing, right? Let's go see how our agent is doing. Very busy, right? We just keep throwing flows that call other flows to the agent. Very fun. But we can see here there's a bit more going on behind the scenes to kind of set this up in terms of composable tasks that actually do this work for you. But if we drop ourselves over into the logs for this version, kind of just scroll down a little bit, we do have a similar experience, right? Fundamentally, it's still kicking off this other flow run, which we could go, click and see ourselves. I'll do that for task B, or flow B rather, since that's the interesting one. We start this wait one, which doesn't have anything to say about itself. Or sorry, the wait one is up here. And then we start this get task run result one, which doesn't have anything really to say about itself, but it goes and grabs the task result from the task slug that we identified. And then scrolling down a little bit, then it starts flow B. And this is the part where, because it now has the result from task A, then it passes this into task B. So let's go grab this here. Just go take a look at it. And again, click into log so we can see what's up. We'll see it's no longer complaining that no data was received. It received 1, which was the hard-coded integer that I put in my flow A to return from my one task in flow A. So this is all the pieces to put this together in Prefect 1.0. But definitely, hopefully you can kind of see that we're sort of calling this other flow somewhere else, and then sometimes we have to do a little extra stuff to get data out of it. Like behind the scenes, basically, the get task run result is like calling the server GraphQL API to say, hey, this flow run ID that I know I kicked off before, and this task slug that I know it has from my flow writer deciding that, can I get its result and put that in memory because I want to pass that along to the next thing, right? So fundamentally, that's what's happening behind the scenes. Way previously, people would have to kind of do that themselves if they wanted to kick off a flow run. Now it's actually in Prefect 1.0 as pieces for you to just compose yourself. But that's Prefect 1.0, right? Let's check out Orion, right? That's what we're all here for. So I am going to, that's not totally true. Prefect 1.0 is awesome. So, I mean, it's still good and it's great that you can do subflows in there, but I know that the title of this stream was Orion Subflows Radar, some combination of those words, right? So let's make sure that we give that the time it deserves as well. So I just killed my server over there because I am now going to start the Orion stack instead. So I have this differently colored terminal so that we don't get lost. This one is running my Orion installation. I'm in a conda environment for Orion instead of in Prefect. And I actually have just a different set of windows altogether so that we don't get as confused as we otherwise would, right? So I'm going to do a little Prefect Orion start over here, right? This is if you're on the Orion branch, or rather if you more likely pip install the version of Prefect that is tagged with Orion. It's like the 2.0 releases. Then you'll have access to this CLI command, Prefect Orion start, and this is going to start up Orion. So if I go to, in this case, localhost 4200, this is what the Orion UI looks like, right? People who are at the last stream will recognize this, but even now you can see it's just got a little bit different look from Prefect Server, which is what I was using before. That's Prefect 1.0. This is Orion, effectively Prefect 2.0, right? So this is what this looks like instead. So let's just get some flows in here, right? Let's start there and then we can see stuff. So let me just move my notes over to make sure that I don't get behind myself here. I have a set of flows in my Sublime text over here. That's the directory that I just changed into. Not these ones. We're done with these ones. We took a look at those. Starting here, right? So this is like the most basic Orion flow calls another flow. So I threw a if name and main at the bottom here so that it will just execute it whenever I am ready, which will be now while I'm talking, right? So this is flow 1. So the way that you describe flows in Orion, we have this flow decorator, and the way that you connect subflows to a flow is you straight up just call the function name that also has a flow decorator in the parent flow you want, right? So there's no like finagling around of anything else. It's just very like natural in terms of probably very similar to what you're used to if your existing legacy code or just like your day-to-day now code, right? We don't have to call it legacy, like it just is your code right now. And definitely, this is a lot easier for stuff that's pre-production, you know, when you're just testing some stuff out. This is way easier to set up. There's no like extra configuration. Doesn't feel like we're productionizing anything. We're just living our lives, right? We just want to get a little Orion API fun in there. We don't need it to like be a whole process. So this is one of the advantages of Orion API just from design at the beginning. So hopefully this has immediately become clear because it's a lot easier for us to just call Subflow. So this is the most basic. Again, they're just going to report who they are. We can see over in our flow run, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Also, I realize I can't go that far down because my head is too big down here. My talking head is too big down here. But you'll see here, it starts a flow run, Voracious Pig for parent flow 1, and then begins Subflow run. So already just from the logs, you can kind of tell like it already knows there's like a relationship between these two, like a parent-child parent flow subflow relationship between these two. And we're gonna go to the UI here, but you're gonna see that just as API objects, they're more aware of each other than Prefect 1.0 was aware of each other, right? So the parent flow reports it's the parent flow, the subflow reports it's the subflow. Clever Inchworm, our subflow, gets its own completed state. Voracious Pig, our parent flow, gets its own completed state, and then we're out of here, right? So we're done. So let's go check out what that looks like over here. So I can click into my flow run, our parent one here, our parent flow parent flow one run is a Voracious Pig one, right? That's what our log started off with. And our next one is Clever Inchworm, right? That's our subflow. So we can see both of these independently in here. We could click either of them as we like. I'm going to click on the parent flow, Voracious Pig, right? And in here, we can see our parent flow information. And then the next part, which is not that interesting yet, but will be interesting later, is that we have this Clever Inchworm card in this radar view. So looking at this, I realize I'm using an old version of the wrong Conda environment. Too many Conda environments, everybody. I'm on an old version of Orion. So let me quickly start that over a little bit. And I'm going to instead activate Orion Dev. Fancy, right? We're going to do the same thing over here. I have to spell it right though. Activate Orion Dev. Okay, cool. And then now is when I'm going to start Prefect Orion start. There we go. Okay, so here, I mean, there's a little preview, I guess, but on a previous version of Orion, this tab here, Subflow runs, is grayed out, right? So, but that has changed. So I'm going to show you that in our new version here. Let's give it let's go back to here. And I should be running my good version now and go look at my parent flow. Okay, cool. We're in the new version of Orion. Sorry for the side track there. But as I expected to show you here, we have two tabs here on our parent flow, right? Voracious Pig. We're still in Voracious Pig. I have my task runs that are part of this flow, and then I have my subflow runs. So like separates them out. It knows which one is which, right? And then I can go click on my subflow from here, right? Just casually. I can just head over here. And then it doesn't do anything that interesting. It doesn't have any tasks. I'm going to build up some examples here where this UI is more interesting. But the thing I really want to highlight here is we can also just click straight back to Voracious Pig from our subflow view. So like it knows, right? It knows that they're friends. It's not that I like creeped in logs and like jumped around or like looked for some metadata on some states or anything like that. It's right here in the UI. I can just jump around between my parent flow and my subflow, and that like works, you know, kind of all the way down. We're going to get some more stacks of things here. So, all right. So hopefully that already shows like just UI, API compatibility for like this subflow world that we want to live in, where we can just call flows and other flows. So let's go to the next level up, right? So I have flow 2, right? So I created some tasks in here. Again, they're all just going to sort of print out basically something identifying which task they are. But I'm going to put these inside my flow so we can start to see especially the power of all of the Orion UI and API connections in terms of how tasks and flows are aware of each other and their sort of, I guess, lineage, and how that makes this a nicer experience for us for people who are working with Subflows. So I have, again, this task decorator. This is probably looks pretty similar to Prefect 1.0, but we can use this task decorator to make any unit of code in any function that is a unit of code into a task. And then just scrolling down here, I have my parent flow and my subflow. Fundamentally, structurally, these are very similar to what I just showed you in flow one. So my parent flow at the end calls subflow. Subflow itself has a flow decorator on it. It's a flow and it does its own thing. But now they have some tasks in there too. So the parent flow does task number 1, or it's called 1 task and 2 task, right? And they have some dependencies set on each other, not data dependencies, but just upstream dependencies, right? 2 task has been advised to wait for 1 task. Or down here with subflow, where it's running A task and B task has been advised to wait for the A task. So they have some timeliness constraints implied there, and that's what this wait for keyword is good for in Orion. So I'm going to give this one a go so that it actually is run against my Orion instance. And we'll see it's a little bit longer. Oh, wait, I forgot you can't see that. Let's go over here. All right. Let's hide this. We don't need to see that anymore. Okay, so it's a little bit longer, so let's bring it over here. But let's see, we're starting here, right? Python, flow 2.0, or flow2.py. Slim Ladybug, starting up, right? It knows it's the parent flow. That's the first print statement. Then it submits this task run to the task runner, and it outputs 1 task and finishes that. Then it submits this 2 task to the task runner. 2 task runs. Then that one's finished. Then the next line of execution is to begin this next subflow, Loutish Lizard, right? So it reports that it's the subflow. That is the line down here, right? And then reports that it ran the A task, reports that it ran the B task. Again, just my super boring print statements that are associated with every task here. And then everybody gets shut down. But again, it knows that the second the second flow is kicking off is a subflow. But all we just had to do was call the function like normal. So let's take a look at what that looks like in the UI. Make this a little bit bigger here. Go back home. Check out my flow runs for my Slim Ladybug, right, is where we started. So we can see that now some tasks are actually rendered in here in sort of like my task run list. And then also my subflow run, Loutish Lizard, is still accessible as well. So we can click into Loutish Lizard and see that it has its own tasks too, right? Because I gave it A task and B task to run, so it knows about that. It's kind of a high, like not the right resolution right now yet, but the timeline shows our 2 tasks between them. It's a little bit easier to see in big view. Timeline view is still on edit. But let me also jump back up to our parent to show a little bit about this radar view and how this starts to become a little bit more fun and similar to the interface we're using with Subflow tabs. All right, so I don't think I even really brought up that radar is kind of like this new, awesome, great way to view your subflows, which was introduced in this blog post just a couple weeks ago in November as a new way of visualizing workflows, right? Cool image, right? And the idea here is that people want to be able to sort of see their dependencies in potentially in like a more like feels more expansive, I guess. And the other nice advantage of this is, especially for the people with subflows, you can drill down into the view just for your subflow and it feels really natural. There's like a 3D chess thing going on here that I'm sure if I was better at 3D chess that I could make a more relevant analogy to. But if I take a little zoom here on my radar view for Slim Ladybug for my parent flow, you'll see I have a task here, 1 task that's kind of terminal here in the circle, 2 task here, and then I have my Loutish Lizard, right? This is a subflow, right? Normally over in the UI I could go click on Loutish Lizard. This one's hard. And like check it out on its own UI page. Same thing with radar. This button here that says 2 task runs, if I click on that, I actually just got dropped down a level. You can kind of imagine like all of these like rings are maybe stacked on top of each other. And this is Loutish Lizard's radar view, where I can see my A task over here and my B task over here. So let's build up some examples so we can see some cooler versions of this. But this is the first taste of I just dropped from like one level of view like down to the next one, just seamlessly between my radar visualizations. And then I can just press the back button. I'm back in Slim Ladybug. I can see, you know, what's going on up here. I can click 2 task runs. I get dropped into Loutish Lizard. I can see what happened in this subflow separately. All right, so let us move on to our flow 3. Let me get a little bit more screen real estate here so that I can show you what flow 3 looks like over here. So what I'm going to do now is pass some data between these things, and two versions of that. One, I'm going to pass data between tasks. That's pretty normal. 2, I'm going to pass data from my flow to my subflow, and this is what I showed you in Prefect 1.0. We kind of had to do a little bit of extra stuff. It's going to look real natural here in our example now. So I just kind of changed up my tasks a little bit so that some of them take arguments, and then, you know, they'll report that they, you know, something that uses that argument, just print out that like, hey, I got my data from the previous thing. So all of that is just trying to make it easier for us to follow the line. But then if we highlight down here, right, my same 2 flows, parent flow and subflow, parent flow and subflow. Parent flow is going to call its 2 tasks, 1 task and 2 tasks, just like we've been doing. Now I've changed it so that they actually return data, and also the 2 tasks accepts data. So they're going to do that. And then you can see I have my call to subflow, and I just pass it this variable. And down here, this flow, it just takes a variable. And then it goes on and gives that variable to a task in itself, right? That then gets used to then, and then it returns new value that gets passed on to the B task. So this piece of data is flowing, right, all the way through from my parent flow through my subflow, being acted on in tasks in my subflow, but I didn't need to do any extra setup. I just called everybody the same way that I'm used to. So again, this is like what the Orion API was really trying to make, this natural feeling for how, you know, a lot of things about the API, not just about subflows, but I would say it really shows itself in subflows, especially as compared to Prefect 1.0, that this is about making it more sort of just easy, like pass in a function just like you're used to in your day-to-day Python scripts, but you're getting the benefit of Orion bookkeeping everything for you and giving you this nice UI, right? So let's give it a go. This one's 3, right? Do we all agree that this one's number 3? We can give the logs a quick look, just to highlight. Let's see, where did we start? Here's our start point, right? Python flow 3.py. And this one, just to showcase, since I quickly went over the logs, 1 task will pass its data to 2 tasks. 2 tasks will report that it got its data from 1. This is actually the string that 1 task returns that gets just injected into the print statement. The subflow starts up. Then the A task from the subflow knows it got its data from 2, right? The return value of 2 task is just the string TWO that gets squished into the print statement for task A. So this is like the proof of it, that we passed our data from 2 task into our subflow, and it like made it, you know, out just totally fine. And then B task just reports that it got its data from A, right? So then everybody just the cascades continue, right? So let's go take a look at that in the UI really quick. This one is my parent flow 3. All right, and we can see, you know, our timeline view, kind of similar. We've got our 1 task, 2 task. It knows about its subflow that it's calling, but you can see the preview of our radar over here is a little bit more, you know, spicy. And if we open it up, we'll see that one of the nice advantages of radar is not just that we can like drop a ring down, but that linear dependencies, like data dependencies between tasks, will be rendered as concentric circles pulling out, right? This is like super awesome to me. Like, I think this looks super slick, and also is very similar to how I am imagining it when I have sort of like start points in flows or in subflows, but then they kind of like progress out as they have their own dependencies. I have had, you know, flows that acted like this, that had like big schematics where like flow charts are like kind of like crisscrossing all over each other, or like, you know, just like there's a big branch point and then everybody's going branch points and branch points. Sometimes it gets a little crazy, right? So one nice thing about this radar view is that it's kind of turns that a little bit on its head, and we can focus in on sort of what level of execution that we want to, or we can follow a single path through its route, basically through these expanding circles, a little bit easier and without as much getting lost, at least in my opinion, as I have experienced with more of like the classic top down or left to right or right to left schematic flows. So that's my take, and this is definitely something everybody should be kicking around radar as much as they want and see if it speaks to them. I'm gonna run like a kind of bigger example so we can see everything in 2 more flows. But just to highlight this, right, we can see that I've got my ring, sort of like my center beginning point of one task. 2 tasks is after that. It's a ring out, and then the subflow is dependent on that, right? I'm passing data along the way. It's dependent on data from 2 tasks, and then it's so it renders on its own ring outside. If I drop myself down a level into the subflows radar view, it has its own concentric circles, right? Because its A task and its B task are dependent on each other in that order. So A task is kind of like here in the middle, and then B task is on the next level out. Another nice thing about this setup is that if we have these little hide buttons here, so we can kind of like not see this extra circle if we kind of just want to see stuff from this sort of level of like orchestration beginning, or we can take it all the way to the middle, right? This one is kind of like basic, but now we don't have any concentric circles because this is just kind of like the root of everything from the perspective of this flow. But we can also expand them back out and see what's going on, right? So this is like another type of like collapsibleness, which of course you can get with schematics too, but it can kind of like make your view a little tighter, and then there's just a little bit more real estate for you to choose, you know, which direction you want to view as you go on. Let's check out the next example so that we can get it even more exciting here. Well, let me skip to my final example just to show the UI part that I want to show, and then my final flow 4 is actually going to kind of introduce something else that subflows are good for besides just being beautiful on a radar view, right? So I have this radar subflow.py. There's like a bunch of junk in here. The important part is I just like threw in a bunch more like linearities, like there's this line of tasks that run and then this line of tasks that run. They execute multiple times. The multiple ranges, like 4 times of running this linear task themselves, each call a subflow. This subflow calls another subflow, third flow, 7 times. That itself passes some data along. So the point here is that we can get like kind of a bigger looking radar just so we can see how it looks. So let me give that a go. Woo! Yeah, so there's kind of like a lot of tasks in here. It's like auto-generating, right? Like I just hard-coded how many here, but it's gonna do a bunch of that. It's not really easy for us to like read the logs of that, but we can go take a look. Maybe we can catch it. No, it's too fast. While it's running, of course, some of these cards are blue, or some of these are blue because they're in running mode. But just to show you a little bit of a deeper example here, right? So I have like a more complicated timeline. Everything's still sequential because I'm using sequential executor. That's spoilers for what I'm going to tell you in our next flow. But my radar view, this is kind of the part that I want to show you. This is kind of where we get to see like a bigger view of something that has a lot of branches, that is like initiating lots of like independent branches of execution at this top level and then like going and doing its own thing along the way. So here we can see that we have several levels of circle now because we have these like many chained calls down the line of data dependencies going through. And again, I'm sort of auto-generating that they're running multiple times so that we can kind of see how radar like places everything around and how this is like a route that you can then take to see things in a different way, right? So in sort of big view, everything's showing. I have all these circles. You can see as I'm just floating around here, if you hover over a task, it's going to show just the connection points that it has. So if I zoom in a little bit more, on silver task, it's just connecting to gold task. If I hover over this gold task, it knows that it got data from silver task and it passes data to moon task. Moon task here, it's kind of easier if I scroll up just a little bit so you can see that it's really just these two connection points, right? It knows who called it, or more like who passed data to it, and then who it's passing data to. And then down this line, our subflow call is at the very end because it's going to use some data from our last task call. Then down here, we kind of have all of our terminal subflow tasks from all of my independent branches of execution here. They all have some flow runs themselves. So we can click this button again. Remember, this is going to kind of take us from our parent view to just drop us into the radar for the subflow, for this subflow. So I'm going to be able to see what was the radar for the curly zebu subflow run, right? Because that is what this one is called, right? Curly zebu. So if we drop in here, we can see in my example, my second tier, right, or second tier down, runs just flows itself, subflows itself, basically. So these are all subflow cards in and of themselves. They don't have any dependencies at this tier because I just use this tier to kick off some more subflow runs. And then if I go one more down, let's drop into primitive Nyla. Then here in my example, my sort of last tier subflow runs 3 tasks in data dependency order. So here we have a gold task, moon task, and a sun task that just show their concentric routes out, their concentric circles out in terms of execution plan, but it didn't. My example doesn't branch here in any way, so it's just these 3. So again, I'm like dropped all the way down. I can press the back button, drop up one. Right, now I'm back in curly zebu. I can press the back button again, drop up to Daffy Hawk, I guess is the name of my parent flow, and see everything. So we can really just navigate around and drill down sort of any way that we like. All right, I have 15 minutes and I want to show you some other things about subflows and kind of also give you a preview of what is coming for subflows in the future, like what they're going to be even more powerful to do in Orion. Because this is still super cool. It's really easy for us now, right, to just call flows compared to Prefect 1.0. But there's a couple different reasons why people might want to use subflows. So some things that there might be is just to kind of dry things up, right? That you have kind of a recomposable unit. I'm just going to go to this one because it's a little simpler than the one I'm going to introduce. This subflow might be sort of a recomposable unit, and you just want to call it maybe multiple times in the same overall parent flow context, or in another version of this is that you want to use it in other flows that are like owned by somebody else or just generally in a different module or maybe in a different package. So that's an option. I think related to that, just easier to repeat, right? If you want to repeat it in the same flow, in the same flow. In my sort of radar subflow case, this is kind of like, I want to do this subflow 4 times, right? Or I want to do this one 7 times. We can just treat it just like any other way you want to dry up your code for that previously, but conveniently now flows can just be called casually like this, so it works naturally. But the other sort of section of things that people might want to do is to configure their subflows in some different way. So right now, everything is running in sequential order, just like with my default sequential sequential task runner. There's a name change that just landed, so I buried the lead there. But maybe you want to configure your deployment specs differently. You want to put different schedules on parts of subflows, or like maybe when they're running as part of a parent flow, you want them to operate in one way, but when they're potentially running on their own, you want them to run a different way. So that's kind of the category that I want to show you now. And then there's even more work going on in the future of being able to call subflow deployments kind of as just a black box. You don't even necessarily like know like have the specific code handy in terms of the flow you want to call. It's that there's a deployment that you want to call because you want it in like its deployment form, or maybe it's owned by some other team, and you just want to use that reusable piece. So that part we're not going to cover today because that doesn't necessarily exist yet, but that's something that people might want to use Subflows for, right? So I've shown you kind of the top level ones. I just want to dry things up or call things over and over again. But now I'm going to show you the concept of I want to configure things differently. So let's go to flow 4. I've got a bunch of other stuff in here to showcase the situation, because what I'm going to do in flow 4 is I'm going to use a Dask task runner. For Prefect 1.0 people, this word was the word that's used in Prefect 1.0 that represents the same concept is executor. You heard me earlier like say the wrong thing there. But in Orion, it's Dask task runner instead of Dask executor. So kind of like from just a semantics point of view, the purpose of the rename is to make it easier to understand that this is controlling how your tasks are run, right? So you're making a decision of sort of this group of tasks inside this flow. Do I want them to be parallelizable? Do I want to leverage Dask to do them? Or your other option right now in Orion is sequential task executor. They just happen in order, right? And just in the same process. So this is a type of thing that you might want to configure on a subflow by subflow basis. Like maybe okay, I have all these tasks that could just kind of like all happen at the same time as fast as they all can. They all need to like finish at some point, and then that's going to be like the handoff to the next flow. But like this is all just like a collection of tasks that could all just execute as fast as they all can in whatever order that they want to. And I would like that part of my flow to be run by this Dask cluster I have over here, or a local ephemeral Dask cluster or whatever. So the Orion API, the way that subflows are organized, it makes it really easy for you to configure those flows differently in terms of what task runner they're using, just with attributes passed to the flow decorator itself. So I have some stuff in here, this new parallel task, because I want to showcase that when I execute a subflow that's calling this function using sequential executor, everything just happens in order, right? So I have two print statements in here for a randomly generated slug that gets generated within each task. If I use a sequential executor, I'll see print of the same two things, then print of the same two things. Every time this parallel task is called, it's just going to do everything in order. The next one's going to go in order. Nobody's like stepping on anybody else's toes. But if I submit to a Dask cluster many parallel tasks all at once, I would expect these print statements to come out kind of in a different order, because they could all be happening at the same time, right? So if all my logs are being aggregated to one place, which they are in this case, when I'm using Orion and a Dask task runner, I'll get all the logs back to my normal Orion output, my standard out that I've been looking at over here, or my logs in my Orion UI. But I'll see the names potentially, and definitely for how many times I call them, in different orders, because Dask is running them all as fast as the Dask can, as fast as Dask can run, right? So I just threw in this parallel task. There's some like details of how I configured it, but it's not really important for the purposes. But I can post this so you can check it out and run it yourself too. And here I have, again, my favorite parent flow and my favorite subflow, right? But now I've thrown in that my parent flow is going to do some of these parallel tasks. Again, as long as my parent flow is using sequential task runner, they're all just going to happen in order. My subflow is also going to run a bunch of these parallel tasks, but you'll see right here on line 52, this is the important part for configuring subflows differently with different task runners, right? I'm passing that my subflow should use the Dask task runner. By default, the Dask task runner is going to start like a local ephemeral Dask cluster. You could also, put in like an IP address of like wherever your permanent Dask cluster is, or, the many ways that you can make Dask clusters on demand or statically. But this is the part that I want to highlight here from the purposes of the Orion API. This is where we can drop this task runner configuration, and we can do it differently, right? We can have the parent flow do its own thing, then we can have the subflow do its own thing, and we just can configure this right in here. Easy, right? And we can see it happen over live over here. Let's give it a go. So this is flow 4.py. And we're doing it. So the first couple here, as mentioned, the first, I think I called it 10 times. Yeah, 10 times. My parallel task is working with a sequential task runner. You can even see, hopefully now it's more obvious now that these logs are even saying I'm using the sequential task runner for everything that you don't otherwise specify. So my first task, randomly generated this slug, expensive white fedora, prints one, sleeps one, prints one. On to the next one, right? We're sequential. Expensive white Panama, cheap black fedora, seems to be hats, right? Cheap black sombrero. All right, so let's scroll down a little bit. Somewhere down here, you'll see we begin our Subflow run, white lyrebird, and we start a task runner, Dask task runner. That's because I configured my Subflow to use the Dask task runner. And again, I said by default, it's just going to create this ephemeral local cluster for us. Reports where my Dask dashboard is at. But here you can see it submits all of those to the Dask cluster at once, right? The power of using Dask here and the power of combining your Dask and your Orion or even your Dask and your Prefect is that you can use the Prefect orchestration engine to like reason about your flows, but you can still pass it off to a Dask cluster that's able to do a lot of work really fast and reliably, right? So here it's submitting all of these task runs to this Dask task runner, and you'll see our actual output is coming out in different orders. This is because Dask tasks are returning or printing rather in whatever order that those tasks are executing. There's like a, the Gantt chart, which actually we could go see, is all stacked together, right? So we'll see expensive black sandals, cheap white fedora, expensive white socks, expensive red socks, cheap white fedora, there's the second one for that one, right? Expensive white socks, there's the second one for that one. Expensive black sombrero, blah, 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 right? These are all like kind of out of order, but as long as these are tasks that are parallelizable, that's exactly what we want. We can get work done faster with more cores that way, and it's just great, right? So let me sneak over here, take a look at my white lyrebird. Well, actually, let me jump up. So I think it's a little bit wide here. Our first parent flow just does stuff with sequential executor, if you recall, right? It's our subflow that doesn't. So everything in our timeline view is just all in the same line, right? Because it just does one thing after the other. That's the rules of sequential executor. But if I drop myself into my subflow run, you'll see that my timeline view has everything stacked on top of each other. It looks like I got 4 cores, right? So here we can see it's doing as much work as it can. Workers will take over a new job when the old job is done. We can see everything stacked up here because I'm able to run all of those tasks faster with more processing because I'm using this Dask cluster. Okay, one more bit in my last couple minutes here that I want to show you is the concept of flow deployments. So we talked about this a little bit in the last stream too. This is like an Orion concept, the deployment spec. So this is where you can describe different deployments, which deployments themselves right now in Orion kind of have a pretty simple configuration because there's only one place you can deploy them, which is local. But this is the kind of place where you could say, I want this to run on Kubernetes, or I want this to run, somewhere else. Right now, this is also already in the API. This is somewhere you can set the schedule. So you can say that when I run with this deployment, this is the schedule that I want it to run on. And when I say it, I mean, we're targeting flows, right? So we're saying, I have a flow at this place. It has this name. The flow, this flow itself, I want it to run on this schedule with these tags anytime I call this deployment, right? So deployments themselves, you can schedule them like you can see here in line 11 so that like they automatically get submitted, or you can kick them off yourself. But so if, for example, if I kick this one off myself, kind of like the difference in configuration I'm getting is tags versus maybe a different deployment. But schedule, again, something you can set on a deployment. And the other type of thing that you can set on deployments is parameters. And I really want to highlight here that this flow this deployment spec rather, lines 23 through 27 is describing this flow location, flow 4, and flow name parent flow 4. That's exactly the same as this deployment, right? And even just to totally bring it back, that jump over here to flow4.py, that's this flow name in line 43, parent flow 4. That's what we're talking about when we say parent flow 4 and flow name in lines 10 or in 26. The point is I'm making 2 different deployments for the same flow. I'm saying there's a world where I want things to run this way. against this flow, and there's a world where sometimes I want things to run this way in this flow. And both of these can coexist. And by that I mean we can write these deployment specs literally in the same file, like I just did, right? I've got one here at line 7 through 13, one 23 through 28. And then also when I actually create these deployments, so I'm gonna, Ori, let's clear that. Prefect deployment create, then I give it the file that has all my deployment specs in it that I want it to make deployments for. We can press enter here, and it's going to create these 3 different deployments based on, these deployment specs that I have. And if I run back to my UI, look at my new deployments tab, and click the show all deployments because nothing has been scheduled yet, we'll see that I have these 3 deployments here that I could quick run themselves. So the point here is that I have a combination of my actual flow itself, like the code that I want to run and the order and the orchestration that I want it to run, and then other like deployment specific metadata. Right now it's about schedules or what tags get associated. You could include a version tag. You can change, obviously you can change names of your deployment. In the future, this is also going to be about places that this can actually be deployed. How this flow is actually deployed in some other environment. And this is where you can easily, just from this UI, quick run these deployments individually. And again, you can have the same flow, have different types of deployments, including different parameter options. So like a really good use case for this is like, oh, I want to do an experiment of this flow where like the parameters are like this and it needs to be deployed in this place, but I want to do another one where the parameters are like this and it needs to be deployed in this place. And it's easy for you to just write all those deployment specs and create them and manage them in the UI. You can like filter and view them in the UI easily and just keep track of what all of those experiments are without just like constantly running like your flows again with like new parameters and like having some other like tagging or naming scheme. It's kind of more top level here that we can see all of our deployments separately. Okay, so I think that is everything that I want. It's definitely time, but just scrolling through my notes that I have in triplicate in paper on this computer, on that computer too. Just want to make sure I don't miss any good Subflow stuff for you. I think that's everything that we wanted to get through today. So let me sort of switch this view a little bit just to say thank you for coming out and listening to me talk about subflows. Hopefully you're as big of a Subflow fan as I am, especially now in Orion, but just generally subflows have always been a category of things that Prefect users want to do. There is a way to do it in Prefect 1.0 that I showed you now. You could implement that right now in your Prefect deployments, but there's a lot of good stuff in Orion and only more better stuff right coming there too in terms of what your options are going to be in terms of making that easier for you. So definitely encourage everybody to check it out and give it a go if you can. As always, it is my pleasure to show you all the cool new Prefect and Orion stuff that's coming out, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the future too. Remember that there is the Prefect Lives weekly. You can get some more video content that way, and the fireside chat coming up later. Otherwise, I will see everybody on Slack. So, see you there. Bye.